My name is Becky, and I'm 32 years old. I was standing in the courthouse hallway when I saw them, the parents who abandoned me at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport 27 years ago. They weren't there for a tearful reunion or to finally apologize for leaving their 5-year-old daughter alone with nothing but a teddy bear. No, they were there to sue me for the $5.5 million inheritance my adoptive father left me. The woman who left me with just a teddy bear and a note saying please take care of her now claimed I stole her daughter's rightful fortune. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who's experienced family betrayal? Or maybe you're curious about how far some people will go for money? Whatever brought you here, please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more real-life stories about overcoming adversity. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless, because sometimes the people who should protect you become your worst enemies. I can still remember every detail of that day at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, even though I was only 5 years old. My birth parents, who I later learned were named Frank and Diane Morrison, told me we were going on a special trip. I wore my favorite pink dress with butterflies on it and carried my brown teddy bear that I'd named Mr. Buttons. They said they needed to get us some food and told me to sit on the blue plastic chair near gate 23. Just wait right here, sweetie, we'll be back in 10 minutes, my mother said, avoiding eye contact. My father ruffled my hair without his usual smile and they walked away quickly, pulling their suitcases behind them. 10 minutes turned into an hour. An hour became 2, then 3. I remember watching families board planes, business people rushing past, and the sun moving across the big windows. My stomach hurt from hunger and fear, but I kept telling myself they'd come back. They had to come back. Parents don't just leave their children. But as the airport began to empty out for the evening, an older security guard with kind eyes noticed me. He asked where my parents were, and I told him they went to get food. When he asked how long ago, I couldn't answer because I didn't know how to read the big clock on the wall yet. That's when he found the note safety pinned inside my jacket. Please take care of her. We can't anymore. Her name is Becky. The security guard's face changed completely when he read those words. He called for backup, then knelt down to my level and told me everything would be okay. But even at 5, I knew nothing would ever be okay again. The police came, then social workers. They asked me questions I couldn't answer. Did I know my last name? Morrison, I told them. Did I know my parents' phone number? No. Did I have any other family? I didn't know. All I had was Mr. Buttons and a broken heart that wouldn't stop hoping they'd walk back through those airport doors. The first foster home was a blur of strange smells and unfamiliar faces. The Johnsons already had 4 foster kids and 2 biological children. I was just another mouth to feed, another bed to make. I lasted 6 months there before they said I was too difficult, too many nightmares, too much crying. The second foster home was worse. The Walkers seemed nice at first, but Mr. Walker had a temper that exploded after his evening drinks. He never hit me hard enough to leave marks where social workers could see, but I learned to stay quiet and invisible. Mrs. Walker pretended not to notice, losing herself in afternoon soap operas and boxed wine. It was at my third foster home where I met Grace. She was 2 years older than me, with bright red hair and more freckles than stars in the sky. She'd been in the system since she was 3 and taught me the unspoken rules. Don't get too attached. Don't expect much. Don't trust easily. But despite her warnings, we became inseparable. She was the first person since the airport who made me feel like I mattered. We'd stay up late whispering about what our lives would be like when we aged out of foster care. She wanted to be a lawyer to help kids like us. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I just wanted someone to want me. Everything changed when I was 7. The Henderson family visited the group home where Grace and I had been placed. Richard Henderson was tall with silver hair and kind brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. His wife Martha was petite with soft hands and a voice like honey. They were looking to adopt, and something about me caught their attention. Maybe it was how I helped the younger kids with their homework, or how I still carried Mr. Buttons everywhere, a symbol of the childhood I'd lost. They visited every week for 2 months, taking me to parks and museums, teaching me to ice skate, showing me what a real family could be. The day they told me they wanted to adopt me was the first time I'd felt hope since the airport. But it came with crushing guilt about leaving Grace behind. She hugged me tight and whispered, "Take this chance, Becky. Take it and don't look back. Promise me you'll make something of yourself." I promised, even though we both cried. The adoption process took 6 months of paperwork, home visits, and court appearances. The day the judge declared I was officially Becky Henderson was the day I started to believe in second chances. Richard and Martha didn't just give me their name. They gave me a future I never thought possible. Richard Henderson wasn't just a successful tech entrepreneur who built his company from nothing. He was the father I never knew I needed. From the moment the adoption was finalized, he threw himself into parenthood with the same passion he brought to his business. He converted the guest room into a paradise of purple walls and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling because I'd mentioned once that I liked looking at the stars. Every night for the first year, he'd sit on the edge of my bed and read to me until I fell asleep, his presence chasing away the nightmares of being left behind. When I was 10, Richard noticed me watching him work on his computer one evening. Instead of shooing me away, he pulled up a second chair and asked if I wanted to learn. That night, he taught me basic HTML, and my fascination with technology was born. He bought me my own laptop and enrolled me in coding camps. While other kids played video games, I was building websites and learning Python. Richard would beam with pride when I showed him my projects, no matter how simple. "You've got the mind for this, Becky Bear," he'd say, using the nickname that made me feel truly his. Martha was the mother who taught me that love could be gentle. She was a pediatric nurse who understood trauma in ways that helped her navigate my complicated emotions. She never pushed when I withdrew, never took it personally when I tested boundaries, never gave up when I pushed them away. She taught me to bake, to garden, to trust again. Sunday mornings were our special time, making elaborate breakfasts while Richard slept in, dancing to oldies in the kitchen, flower in our hair and joy in our hearts. She showed me that mothers could stay, could choose you every day, could love you even when you were difficult to love. The three of us became a unit stronger than blood. Richard coached my robotics team, never missing a competition even when it meant rescheduling important meetings. Martha volunteered as the school nurse just to be closer to me. They attended every parent-teacher conference together, every school play where I had just one line, every science fair where my projects inevitably involved some coding element Richard had helped me perfect. They gave me the childhood the Morrisons had stolen, one memory at a time. Then came the diagnosis that shattered our perfect world. Martha found the lump during a routine self-exam. Breast cancer, stage 3. I was 15, old enough to understand but not old enough to process losing the mother who'd chosen me. The next 2 years were a blur of chemotherapy, hospital visits, and watching the strongest woman I knew become frail. Richard and I took turns sitting with her during treatments, reading her favorite books aloud, pretending we didn't notice when she dozed off mid-sentence. She used her good days to teach me everything she thought I'd need to know. How to do laundry properly. How to manage period cramps. How to trust your gut when something felt wrong. How to love yourself even when the world made it hard. Martha died on a Tuesday morning in spring, with Richard and me holding her hands. Her last words were about how proud she was of the young woman I was becoming. The funeral was a blur of flowers and casseroles from well-meaning neighbors. But what I remember most was sitting with Richard in our too-quiet house afterward, both of us lost without her warmth. We grieved differently but together. He threw himself into work. I threw myself into school. But every night, we'd have dinner together at the kitchen table, Martha's chair empty but her presence still felt. We'd talk about our days, about Martha, about anything except how scared we were to lose each other too. That shared grief bonded us even deeper. Richard started teaching me about his business, not just the technical side but the leadership aspects. He'd take me to meetings during school breaks, introducing me as his daughter with such pride that it made my chest tight. When I got accepted to MIT, he cried actual tears, something I'd only seen when Martha died. She would be so proud, he whispered, and I knew he meant both my mothers, the one who gave me life and the one who gave me a reason to live it. He insisted on driving me to campus himself, the car loaded with everything a college student could need and more. He helped me set up my dorm room, met my roommate, and embarrassed me by taking too many pictures. Before he left, he hugged me tight and said, "You'll always be my daughter, Becky." Biology be damned. College was where I truly flourished. Richard's years of teaching paid off as I excelled in my computer science classes. I called him every Sunday, our new tradition, telling him about professors and projects, parties and possibilities. He visited once a month, taking me and whatever friends I could gather to fancy dinners where he'd regale us with stories from the early days of tech. During my junior year, I pitched him an idea for a software that could help foster care agencies better match children with families. His eyes lit up with such pride and excitement. "That's my girl, thinking about others while building your future. Let's talk business plans when you get home." After graduation, I could have worked anywhere. Google, Apple, Microsoft all extended offers. But I wanted to work with Richard, to learn from the man who'd given me everything. He made me start at the bottom, no nepotism in the Henderson Company. I earned every promotion, every raise, every ounce of respect from coworkers who initially thought I was just the boss's daughter. By 25, I was ready to launch my own subsidiary company under the Henderson umbrella, focusing on technology solutions for social services. Richard was my first investor, my mentor, my biggest cheerleader. Then came another devastating diagnosis. ALS, the doctor said, and the world tilted again. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Motor neuron disease. A death sentence delivered in medical terms. Richard, the man who'd built an empire with his hands and mind, would slowly lose control of both. The progression was cruel but steady. First a tremor in his right hand. Then difficulty with buttons and keyboards. Walking became shuffling. Shuffling became wheelchairs. But his mind remained sharp, his spirit unbroken. He adapted with the same determination that built his company, using voice recognition software, eye tracking technology, anything to keep working, keep contributing, keep being my father. I moved back home without discussion. The company could run remotely. Richard needed me, and I needed to be there. We converted the dining room into a medical suite. I learned to operate feeding tubes and breathing machines. We had nurses during the day, but nights were ours. I'd sit with him, reading earnings reports or science fiction novels, whatever kept his mind engaged. We talked about everything and nothing. About Martha. About the life he'd built. About the legacy he'd leave. About how I'd saved him as much as he'd saved me. Those conversations in the dark, with medical equipment beeping softly, were some of the most precious moments of my life. Richard died on a Thursday evening in December, 3 days after his 70th birthday. I was holding his hand, telling him about a new update to our software that would help track foster children's educational progress more effectively. He couldn't speak anymore, but his eyes, those kind brown eyes that first saw something worth saving in a scared 7-year-old, flickered with pride one last time. The funeral was massive, tech industry leaders and employees filling the cathedral, but I barely registered their presence. I was truly alone now, orphaned twice over, but this time with the tools and strength Richard had given me to face it. The will reading was scheduled 2 weeks later in the offices of Wilson, Chen and Associates, Richard's law firm for the past 20 years. Mr. Wilson, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver temples, had been Richard's friend as well as his attorney. He greeted me with a warm hug and tears in his eyes. "Becky, your father left very specific instructions. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of, but also that you understood some things about your past." I nodded, wondering what more there could be to know. Richard had always been transparent with me, or so I thought. The numbers were staggering. $5.5 million in liquid assets. Another $2 million in real estate, including the family home and a vacation property in Colorado I didn't even know we owned. His 60% stake in Henderson Technologies, worth approximately $15 million at current valuations. Various smaller investments and personal property bringing the total estate to nearly $25 million. All of it left to his beloved daughter, Rebecca Grace Henderson, with love and the absolute confidence that she will use these resources to continue making the world better for children who need second chances. But it was the letter that changed everything. Mr. Wilson handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Richard's shaky handwriting. He wrote this 2 years ago, when the diagnosis was still fresh. He wanted you to have it only after. He said you'd know when to read it. I waited until I got home, sitting in Richard's study surrounded by his books and awards, his presence still lingering in the leather and coffee scent of the room. My hands trembled as I opened the letter. "My dearest Becky," it began, and I could hear his voice in every word. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably wondering why I'm writing instead of having told you this in person. The truth is, I'm a coward. I couldn't bear to see your face when you learned what I'm about to tell you. 3 years ago, I hired a private investigator to find your biological parents. I told myself it was to protect you, to make sure they could never hurt you again. But I think part of me wanted to understand what kind of people could abandon such a precious child." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I forced myself to continue reading. "Their names are Frank and Diane Morrison. They live in Houston now, though they've moved frequently over the years. They had 2 more children after abandoning you, a daughter named Ashley who's now 22 and a son named Connor who's 20. They've had various business ventures, all failed, and have a history of financial troubles and questionable legal dealings." The private investigator uncovered a pattern of behavior that made me sick to my stomach. "You weren't the first child they abandoned, Becky. But I'll leave those details for the investigator's report, also enclosed." I found the investigator's report beneath the letter, a thick manila folder filled with photographs and documents. There they were, the faces I'd tried to recall for 27 years. Frank had thinning hair and eyes that looked everywhere but at the camera. Diane was blonde with a sharp face and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The photos of Ashley and Connor showed young adults who looked nothing like me, raised with the parents who couldn't be bothered to raise their firstborn. I stared at those images until they burned into my retinas, trying to understand how they could look so normal, so unremarkable, like any other aging couple from the suburbs. The investigator's report was thorough and damning. Frank Morrison had a history of failed businesses and check fraud. Diane had been investigated twice for identity theft, though charges were never filed. They'd lived in 7 states over 20 years, always leaving when things got complicated. There were hospital records from California showing they'd abandoned a son named Marcus 3 years before I was born. Another set of records from Nevada revealed a daughter named Trinity, left at a fire station when she was 4. I wasn't special. I was just another inconvenience they'd discarded when life got difficult. Richard's letter continued with words that broke my heart. "I struggled with whether to tell you. Martha and I discussed it many times. She felt you had a right to know, but I wanted to protect you from more pain. In the end, I chose silence, perhaps wrongly. But I want you to know that I've taken steps to protect you. They know who you are now, Becky. 2 years ago, Frank showed up at the house while you were at work. He'd somehow discovered you were their abandoned daughter and that you'd been adopted by someone with means. He wanted money, claimed they were owed something for giving you a better life. I sent him away with a warning that if he ever contacted you, I'd have him arrested. But I know people like them. They'll wait. They'll watch. And when they think the time is right, they'll come for you." The letter ended with words of love and a warning to be careful. I sat in that study until dawn, reading and rereading, trying to process this new reality. The parents who'd abandoned me knew where I was. They'd already tried once to extract money from our family. And now, with Richard gone and his fortune transferred to me, I was vulnerable in ways I hadn't imagined. I thought about calling someone, but who? Grace was in law school in California. I had work colleagues but no one close enough for this. I was alone with the truth and the growing certainty that this wasn't over. 3 days later, my phone rang with an unknown Houston number. I let it go to voicemail, my heart pounding as I listened to the message. Becky? This is Frank Morrison. Your father. I know this must be strange, hearing from me after all these years, but I heard about Richard Henderson's passing. I'm so sorry for your loss. I was hoping we could talk. There are things you don't understand about why things happened the way they did. Please call me back. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown. Room 412. I just want to explain. I played the message 17 times, each listen making me angrier. Your father, he'd said, as if that title hadn't been forfeited in an airport 27 years ago. Things you don't understand, as if any explanation could justify abandoning a 5-year-old. The Marriott downtown, as if I'd drop everything to meet the man who'd walked away without looking back. I deleted the message but couldn't delete the way his voice made me feel small and abandoned all over again. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office, avoiding the house that felt too empty without Richard's presence. A week passed before Diane appeared. I was leaving the office late, exhausted from back-to-back meetings, when I saw her standing by my car in the parking garage. She looked older than her photos, desperation etched in the lines around her mouth. Rebecca, she called out, and I froze. No one had called me Rebecca in years. It was always Becky. She stepped forward, hands outstretched like she expected a hug. My baby girl. Look at you. So successful, so beautiful. I've thought about you every day for 27 years. Every single day. The lies fell from her lips so easily I almost admired the performance. But I'd learned to spot deception in foster care, and everything about her screamed agenda. Please, I just want 5 minutes, she begged when I moved toward my car without acknowledging her. I stopped, keys clenched so tight they cut into my palm. 5 minutes? You couldn't wait 5 minutes for a 5-year-old at an airport, but now you want 5 minutes from me? I turned to face her, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. You have 30 seconds. Say what you came to say and then leave, or I'm calling security. Her face crumpled into practiced tears, but she rallied quickly. We're your family, Rebecca. Your real family. I know we made mistakes, but we were young and scared. We've changed. We've built a life, a family. Ashley and Connor, your brother and sister, they want to meet you. We all want to make amends. The mention of siblings I'd never known made something twist in my chest, but Richard's warning echoed in my mind. What do you really want? I asked, cutting through her performance. She had the audacity to look offended. I want my daughter back. And yes, I know about the inheritance. Frank told me. We're struggling, Rebecca. The economy, bad investments, medical bills. You have so much now, and we're your blood. Doesn't that mean anything? I laughed, harsh and bitter. Blood? Blood abandoned me at an airport. Love raised me. Love educated me. Love left me this inheritance. You're nothing to me but DNA and bad memories. Now leave before I call the police. But Diane Morrison wasn't done. Her tears dried instantly, replaced by calculation. You can't just dismiss us. We have rights. We're your parents. Richard Henderson poisoned you against us, kept us from finding you sooner. We would have come for you if we'd known where you were. The lies were so bold I almost respected the commitment. She pulled out her phone, showing me pictures of Ashley and Connor like they were bargaining chips. Don't you want to know your siblings? Don't they deserve to know their sister? Don't punish them for our mistakes. Family helps family, Rebecca. That's what real families do. The lawsuit arrived 3 weeks after Diane's parking lot ambush. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked urgently. "Becky, there's a process server here. He says he has legal documents that must be delivered to you personally." My stomach dropped as I signed for the thick envelope, Morrison vs. Henderson emblazoned across the top like a declaration of war. The complaint was 60 pages of legal fiction, painting me as a manipulative opportunist who'd stolen their daughter and inheritance through deception and elder abuse. Their lawyer, Bradley Thornton from Thornton and Associates, was known for aggressive tactics and media manipulation. The allegations were as shocking as they were false. According to the complaint, I had systematically isolated Richard from my biological family, who had been searching for me for decades. They claimed I'd poisoned him against them when they'd tried to reconnect, convincing a sick old man that the loving parents who'd made one mistake in a moment of desperation were villains. They alleged I'd manipulated Richard during his final years, taking advantage of his ALS diagnosis to secure the entire inheritance that should have been shared with my true family. They demanded the entire $5.5 million plus damages for emotional distress and defamation. Reading through the complaint in my office, I felt rage building with each lie. They painted themselves as victims of circumstance who'd left me in a safe place when they couldn't provide proper care, always intending to return. They claimed to have hired private investigators over the years, spending their limited resources trying to find their precious daughter. The narrative was so different from the truth that if I hadn't lived it, I might have believed them. But the most infuriating part was their claim that Richard had known where they were and deliberately kept us apart, denying them their parental rights and me my heritage. I immediately called Mr. Wilson, who connected me with Grace. She'd finished law school and was working at a firm in Los Angeles, specializing in family law. When I told her what was happening, she caught the next flight out. Sitting in Richard's study that night, reviewing the complaint together, she was furious. "This is extortion dressed up as a lawsuit, Becky. They're hoping you'll settle to avoid the publicity. Don't you dare give them a penny. I'm taking this case pro bono. Those bastards abandoned us both in different ways. Now they want to profit from it? Not on my watch." The media storm started within days. Someone, likely Thornton's firm, had leaked the story to local news. "Abandoned daughter sued by birth parents for millions" became the headline that followed me everywhere. Reporters called the office, showed up at the house, ambushed me at the grocery store. Diane gave a tearful interview to Channel 7, spinning her web of lies for the camera. "We made one mistake 27 years ago, and we've regretted it every day since. We just want our daughter back, but she won't even speak to us. Now she has all this money, and we're about to lose our home. We're not asking for much, just help from our own flesh and blood." The public reaction was mixed but largely sympathetic to them at first. Social media exploded with opinions from people who knew nothing about the situation. Comments ranged from supportive, "Money doesn't replace family, she should help them," to suspicious, "Convenient they show up after she inherits millions." Ashley, my supposed sister, started a Facebook page called Justice for the Morrison Family, posting childhood photos of herself and Connor with captions about how they'd always wondered about their missing sister. She shared stories about birthday wishes for a sister they'd never met, Christmas presents bought for Rebecca just in case she came home. Connor took a different approach, sliding into my DMs on various platforms with messages that ranged from pleading to threatening. "I just want to know my sister. Is that so wrong?" Morphed into "You're being selfish with money you didn't earn. Then finally, you'll regret not helping us when you could." I screenshot everything, building a file of harassment that Grace said would be useful. But it was exhausting, watching strangers debate my life online, seeing my trauma reduced to clickbait and comment wars. Some nights I'd read the comments until my eyes burned, looking for validation that I wasn't the monster they painted me to be. The betrayals came from unexpected sources. Carl Henderson, Richard's younger brother who'd always been jealous of his success, gave an interview suggesting Richard might not have been of sound mind in his final years. He mentioned how I'd moved back home to care for him, implying I'd isolated him from family. The fact that Carl had visited exactly twice in those final years, both times asking for loans Richard refused, went conveniently unmentioned. Even worse was Patricia Summers, Richard's former secretary who'd retired 5 years ago. She sold a story to a tabloid claiming she'd overheard arguments between Richard and me about money, complete fabrication that made me question every smile she'd given me over the years. But for every betrayal, there was unexpected support. Richard's business partners released a statement affirming his mental clarity until the end. Employees at Henderson Technologies started a counter-campaign on social media, sharing stories of my involvement in the company and community service. The foster care agency where I volunteered issued a press release about my years of dedication to children in need. Even my old robotics team coach reached out, offering to testify about the family Richard and Martha had been. The battle lines were drawn, not just in court but in the court of public opinion. Grace worked tirelessly, building our defense while maintaining her regular caseload. She hired a private investigator to dig deeper into the Morrison family history. Within a week, we had confirmation of Marcus in California and Trinity in Nevada, both abandoned like me. She tracked down former neighbors, employers, anyone who could testify to Frank and Diane's pattern of behavior. Meanwhile, she filed counterclaims for harassment and defamation, documenting every lie told to media outlets. "This isn't just about defending you anymore," she told me one late night over Chinese takeout and case files. "This is about exposing them for what they are and protecting their other victims." The first pretrial hearing was a circus. Photographers lined the courthouse steps as Diane played grieving mother for the cameras, supported by Ashley in a conservative dress clearly chosen to make her look innocent and wronged. Frank wore an ill-fitting suit and the expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Connor skulked behind them in ripped jeans, apparently not getting the memo about court-appropriate attire. Grace and I pushed through the crowd in silence, her hand on my elbow providing steady support. Inside the courtroom, Thornton immediately tried to paint me as heartless and vindictive, while Grace calmly presented evidence of the Morrisons' true motivations. The judge, Honorable Patricia Williams, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who seemed unimpressed by theatrics from either side. She reviewed the initial motions with sharp eyes, occasionally asking pointed questions that made Thornton sweat through his expensive suit. When he tried to argue that the Morrisons deserved immediate financial support during the trial, she cut him off. "Mr. Thornton, your clients abandoned a 5-year-old child. They made no attempt at contact for 25 years. They appear only after her adoptive father's death leaves her with substantial assets. This court is not inclined to reward such behavior with preliminary injunctions." Motion denied. That night, Connor broke into my house. I woke to the sound of glass breaking downstairs, immediately locking my bedroom door and calling 911 while grabbing the baseball bat Richard had kept in the closet. The police arrived within minutes, finding Connor in Richard's study, frantically searching through filing cabinets. He'd cut himself on the window glass, leaving bloody handprints on everything he touched. As they led him away in handcuffs, he screamed that I owed them, that family helped family, that I was a selfish bitch who'd forgotten where she came from. I stood in my father's ransacked study, looking at the blood on his papers, and felt something inside me harden into resolve. The break-in changed the game. Connor was charged with breaking and entering, burglary, and criminal mischief. The judge issued restraining orders against the entire Morrison family. But Ashley doubled down on social media, claiming I'd set up her brother, that we'd planted evidence, that the rich girl was persecuting the poor family. She posted photos of Connor's mugshot with captions about how money corrupted justice. The harassment escalated to death threats in my email, voicemails promising I'd pay for destroying their family. Grace insisted I hire security, and suddenly I had bodyguards following me to work, strangers protecting me from the strangers who claimed to be family. The private investigator Grace hired was named Jerome Washington, a former FBI agent who specialized in family cases. He worked quietly for 3 weeks before presenting his findings in a conference room at Grace's firm. The truth was worse than even Richard's letter had revealed. Frank and Diane Morrison weren't just parents who'd made bad choices. They were serial con artists who'd turned child abandonment into a twisted pattern of survival. Jerome laid out files on the conference table like evidence at a crime scene, each one representing a life derailed by the Morrisons' selfishness. Marcus Bradley, formerly Marcus Morrison, was 35 now and working as a police officer in Sacramento. He'd been abandoned at a hospital emergency room when he was 3, with a similar note about his parents' inability to care for him. The security footage Jerome had somehow obtained showed Frank and Diane literally running from the hospital after leaving their toddler with a nurse. Marcus had spent 15 years in foster care, aging out without ever being adopted. He'd joined the police force, Jerome explained, specifically to help abandon children and catch parents who hurt kids. He'd legally changed his last name the day he turned 18, erasing the last connection to the people who'd thrown him away. Trinity Chen, formerly Trinity Morrison, was 29 and working as a social worker in Las Vegas. She'd been left at Fire Station 19 when she was 4, old enough to remember her parents' faces and the promises that they'd come back soon. The firefighters had found her with a threadbare blanket and a note that said simply, "Please help her. We can't." She'd been lucky, adopted within a year by a loving couple who supported her through the trauma. But Jerome had interviewed her, and she still had nightmares about the day her parents drove away. She'd become a social worker specializing in abandoned children, turning her pain into purpose just like Marcus had. But the revelations went deeper. Jerome had uncovered a pattern of fraud that followed the Morrisons across state lines. In California, they'd run a fake charity for orphaned children, collecting donations they pocketed before Marcus was born. The investigation into that fraud was what prompted them to abandon Marcus and flee to Nevada. In Nevada, they'd sold fake insurance policies to elderly residents, making enough to live comfortably until pregnant Diane became a liability. They'd abandoned Trinity when investigators got too close, fleeing to Texas where I'd been born. After leaving me at DFW, they'd continued their pattern, though they'd apparently learned to stop abandoning the children they continued to have. The FBI had been investigating them for welfare fraud when they abandoned me. Jerome produced documents showing they'd been collecting benefits in multiple states under various names, claiming children who didn't exist or had been abandoned. My abandonment coincided with federal agents closing in on their Texas operation. They'd fled to Arkansas next, where Ashley was born, then Louisiana for Connor. Each move corresponded with some investigation or suspicious activity. They'd finally settled in Houston 10 years ago, but only because Frank's mother had died and left them a house they couldn't sell due to liens. They weren't parents who'd made one tragic mistake. They were criminals who'd discarded children like evidence of their crimes. Jerome had also investigated their current financial situation, and it was as desperate as they'd implied but for different reasons than claimed. Frank had started and failed 7 businesses in 10 years, each collapse leaving more debt and burned bridges. The latest, a supposedly revolutionary app for pet grooming services, had folded 6 months ago after investors discovered he'd been embezzling funds. Diane had her own troubles, fired from 3 retail jobs for theft and currently unemployable due to her reputation. Ashley worked part-time at a mall kiosk selling phone cases, while Connor had dropped out of community college and spent his days gaming and posting conspiracy theories online. They weren't victims of the economy. They were victims of their own choices, still running from consequences decades in the making. The most damning evidence came from Jerome's interview with Frank's former business partner, Harold Morrison, no relation despite the shared name. Harold revealed that Frank had been bragging about his abandoned daughter's inheritance for months before Richard died. He knew the old man was sick. Kept saying when he croaked, they'd be set for life. Said the girl owed them for giving her up to rich people. Made me sick, honestly. That's why I dissolved our partnership. Harold had provided text messages where Frank discussed strategies for getting the money, including the lawsuit plan. The messages predated Richard's death by 6 months. They'd been planning this while my father was still alive, vultures circling before the body was even cold. Finding Marcus and Trinity became my obsession. Grace thought it was too risky, that they might not want to be involved, but I needed to meet the siblings who'd shared my fate. Jerome arranged the meetings carefully, neutral locations with security nearby in case things went wrong. Marcus agreed to meet first, at a coffee shop in Sacramento. I drove up alone despite Grace's protests, needing to face this part of my history without an audience. He was already there when I arrived, a tall man with broad shoulders and cautious eyes that scanned the room constantly, a cop's habit born from survival instincts honed in foster care. The conversation started awkwardly, two strangers connected by abandonment and DNA. But as we talked, the walls came down. Marcus remembered more than I did, being older when abandoned. He told me about Frank's temper, Diane's drinking, the nights of screaming fights that preceded his abandonment. They told me I was going to camp, he said, stirring his coffee with mechanical precision. Packed my favorite toys and everything. I was so excited until they left me at that hospital. Kept asking the nurses when they'd come back. Took me years to stop looking for them in crowds. We compared foster care experiences, the homes that broke us and the ones that tried to help. He'd never been adopted, aging out angry and alone, joining the force to find the family in brotherhood and purpose. Trinity flew in from Vegas the next day, and the three of us met at my hotel suite. She was petite with delicate features that looked nothing like mine or Marcus's, but her eyes held the same wariness we all shared. She'd been the lucky one, she said, adopted quickly by a family who loved her. But the abandonment still shaped everything. I study attachment disorders now, she explained, her voice clinical but her hands shaking. The damage done when parents leave, it never fully heals. You just learn to build around it. We spent hours sharing stories, medical histories, trying to piece together a family tree from fragments and lies. None of us looked alike beyond superficial similarities, making us wonder if Frank was even all our biological fathers or if that was another Morrison deception. The decision to stand together came naturally. Marcus slammed his fist on the table when I told them about the lawsuit, his cop instincts flaring at the injustice. Those bastards want money from the kid they threw away? Not happening. I've got vacation time saved up. I'll be at every hearing. Trinity was quieter but no less resolved. They need to be exposed, she said. How many other kids have they hurt that we don't know about? How many families have they scammed? This isn't just about your money, Becky. It's about stopping them. We made a pact that night, three abandoned siblings united not by love but by shared trauma and the determination that the Morrisons would face consequences for their choices. Back in Houston, I shared everything with Grace. She immediately saw the legal implications. 3 abandoned children, 3 different states, patterns of fraud and abuse. This destroys their entire narrative. No judge will side with parents who abandoned multiple children while committing federal crimes. She began preparing subpoenas for Marcus and Trinity's testimony, for Harold Morrison's business records, for FBI files on the old investigations. The Morrisons had opened this door demanding money. They had no idea they'd invited their past to walk through and destroy them. But the Morrisons weren't done with their dirty tactics. 2 days after I returned from meeting my siblings, someone leaked my sealed juvenile records to the press. Every foster home placement, every therapy session note, every minor behavioral incident from my traumatized childhood was suddenly public fodder. The headlines screamed about my troubled past, conveniently ignoring that the trouble started with abandonment. Ashley did interviews suggesting I'd always been difficult, that maybe our parents had sensed something wrong with me. It's sad, really, she told one reporter. They probably saved her by giving her up. Look how angry and vindictive she turned out even with all that money. The violation of privacy sent me spiraling. Those records were supposed to be sealed, protected, sacred. Reading strangers debate whether I'd been too damaged to keep felt like being abandoned all over again. Grace filed emergency motions while I hid in Richard's study, surrounded by his books and the lingering scent of his cologne. That's where I found it, tucked behind a photo of the 3 of us at my MIT graduation. Another envelope, marked only if they come for you. Inside was a DVD labeled security footage and a note in Richard's handwriting. I hoped you'd never need this, but I knew better. Fathers protect their daughters, even from beyond the grave. The trial began on a rainy Tuesday in March, the weather matching my mood as we entered the courthouse. The media circus had intensified, with national outlets picking up the story of the abandoned daughter sued by her birth parents. Diane had perfected her grieving mother act, arriving in a modest dress with tissues already clutched in her hand. Frank looked uncomfortable in his suit, tugging at his collar like it was choking him. Ashley wore pearls and a cardigan, the picture of wronged innocence, while Connor had at least managed to find decent clothes after his arrest made him realize this was serious. They sat behind their lawyer like a united front, the family they'd never actually been. Bradley Thornton's opening statement was a masterpiece of manipulation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "this case is about a family torn apart by one desperate decision made in poverty and fear. Frank and Diane Morrison were young parents, overwhelmed and facing homelessness. They made the heartbreaking choice to leave their daughter somewhere safe, believing she'd have a better life. They spent the next 25 years regretting that choice, searching for their baby girl, only to discover she'd been poisoned against them by her wealthy adoptive father. Now, with him gone, they simply want to reconnect with their daughter and yes, ask for help from someone who has more than enough to share." The jury seemed sympathetic, several members nodding along as Thornton painted the Morrisons as victims of circumstance and me as a heartless rich girl hoarding wealth. He presented photos of young Frank and Diane, carefully selected to make them look innocent and overwhelmed. He talked about their struggles, their other children who'd grown up wondering about their sister, the empty chair at every holiday dinner. He implied that Richard had known where they were all along and deliberately kept us apart, denying them their parental rights. By the time he finished, I could see doubt in some jurors' eyes. "Money changes people, but it shouldn't erase family bonds," he concluded, returning to his seat with theatrical satisfaction. Grace stood slowly, commanding the room with her presence. She'd traded her usual California casual for a sharp suit that meant business. "What Mr. Thornton just told you is a beautiful story," she began, her voice calm but cutting. "It's also a complete fiction. The truth is far uglier but far more important. Frank and Diane Morrison didn't abandon one child in a moment of desperation. They abandoned 3 children across 3 states while fleeing fraud investigations. They didn't spend 25 years searching for Becky. They spent those years running from the FBI, scamming elderly people, and raising 2 replacement children they somehow managed not to abandon. They appeared in Becky's life only when they learned about her inheritance, which they'd been planning to steal for months before Richard Henderson even died." The jury's attention sharpened as Grace laid out the real timeline. She showed them the pattern: Marcus abandoned in California, Trinity in Nevada, me in Texas, each abandonment coinciding with legal troubles. She presented Frank's business failures and criminal investigations, Diane's employment history riddled with theft accusations. She painted them not as desperate young parents but as calculating con artists who viewed children as disposable when convenient. Every word was backed by documents, photos, records that Jerome had meticulously gathered. By the time Grace finished, the sympathetic looks had turned suspicious, and Diane's perpetual tears seemed less convincing. My testimony came on day 3. Grace had prepared me extensively, but nothing could ready me for sitting in that witness box, staring at the people who'd given me life then thrown it away. I started from the beginning, my voice steady despite the 5-year-old inside me who still wondered why they left. I told them about the airport, the hours of waiting, the note pinned inside my jacket like a shipping label. I described the foster homes, glossing over the worst parts but making clear the trauma abandonment causes. I talked about the Hendersons, how they'd saved me, loved me, given me the family the Morrisons had denied. I kept my eyes on the jury, refusing to look at Frank and Diane, refusing to give them that power. The hardest part was reading Richard's letter aloud. My voice broke when I reached the part about Frank showing up at our house, trying to extort money while Richard was already fighting ALS. Several jurors wiped their eyes as I described caring for my dying father while he worried about protecting me from the people who'd already hurt me once. He knew they'd come after his money, I said, finally looking at the Morrison table. He knew because that's who they are. Not parents who made one mistake, but predators who saw an opportunity. They didn't want me. They wanted what my real father left me. The real parents, the ones who chose me, who raised me, who loved me even when I was difficult and damaged from what they did. Cross-examination was brutal. Thornton tried every trick to paint me as unstable, ungrateful, vindictive. He brought up my foster care behavioral issues, implying I'd been a problem child even then. He suggested I'd manipulated the Hendersons into adopting me, seeing an opportunity for wealth even at 7. The accusations were so absurd that several jurors actually laughed when he implied I'd somehow orchestrated my own abandonment to end up with rich parents. Grace objected repeatedly, but Thornton's strategy was clear: throw enough mud and hope some stuck. But I'd survived abandonment, foster care, and losing both my chosen parents. A sleazy lawyer couldn't break me. The tide truly turned when Marcus testified. He walked into the courtroom in full uniform, his presence commanding respect. He told his story simply: a 3-year-old left at a hospital by parents who ran away. He showed photos from his foster care files, described aging out alone, explained how he'd become a cop to protect kids like him. When Thornton tried to suggest he was lying for money, Marcus laughed bitterly. I don't want their money. I want them held accountable. They threw me away like garbage. Now they want to profit from throwing Becky away too? No. That ends here. His testimony was powerful because it was raw, honest, and completely destroyed the Morrisons' claim of one desperate mistake. Trinity followed, her social worker credentials lending weight to her testimony about abandonment trauma. She explained attachment disorders, the lifelong impact of parental abandonment, the statistics on outcomes for abandoned children. But it was her personal story that resonated: a 4-year-old left at a fire station, old enough to remember and understand she'd been discarded. She'd brought photos her adoptive parents had taken during her recovery: a tiny girl who wouldn't speak for months, who hoarded food fearing abandonment by her new family too. The Morrisons abandoned 3 children in 4 years while committing fraud, she stated clearly. This isn't about poverty or desperation. This is about a pattern of using and discarding children when convenient. Ashley's testimony backfired spectacularly. Coached to play the loving sister denied a relationship, she instead came across as entitled and greedy. Under Grace's cross-examination, she admitted she'd never actually looked for me, had only learned about me when Frank mentioned the inheritance opportunity. She claimed they'd grown up hearing stories about their missing sister, but couldn't provide any specifics. When Grace asked why she'd started the social media campaign, Ashley smirked and said, "Dad thought it would help our case." The jury saw the calculation behind the performance, the apple not falling far from the tree. Even Thornton looked frustrated as Ashley admitted she'd been promised $1 million if they won. Connor's testimony was brief, mostly because he'd been advised to plead the fifth regarding the break-in. But his sullen presence, the bandaged hand from cutting himself on my window, the barely concealed anger at being denied what he felt entitled to, it all painted a picture. When asked why he'd broken into my house, he couldn't help himself. She owes us. We're family. Family shares. The jury saw not a loving brother but an entitled kid raised by con artists who'd taught him that taking was easier than earning. His testimony lasted less than an hour, but the damage to their case was immense. The most dramatic moment came when Diane took the stand. She'd prepared for this moment, dressed perfectly, tears ready to flow. She told her version of events: young parents, overwhelming circumstances, the heartbreaking decision to leave me somewhere safe. But Grace was ready with 27 years of receipts. She presented the welfare fraud documents, the FBI investigation files, the pattern of abandonments. Diane tried to deny it all, claiming mistaken identity, persecution, anything but the truth. But when Grace showed her the note she'd left with Trinity, identical handwriting to mine, Diane's mask finally slipped. "You don't understand," Diane screamed, abandoning her grieving mother act entirely. "We did what we had to do. Those kids were dragging us down. We had plans, dreams. We couldn't be tied down by mistakes. The courtroom gasped at her, calling her children mistakes. Even Frank looked shocked by her outburst. Thornton tried to object, to silence his client, but Diane was beyond control. Becky should be grateful. We gave her to rich people. She got everything while we struggled. She owes us. That money should be ours. We're her parents. The judge had to call for order as Diane continued ranting about ungrateful children and stolen opportunities. Frank's testimony was quieter but no less damning. Under pressure, he admitted to knowing about my adoption, to attempting contact only after learning about the inheritance. He tried to justify it as reconnecting with family, but Grace presented his text messages to Harold Morrison, discussing the lawsuit months before Richard died. The messages were explicit about wanting money, about deserving compensation for giving me up. When Grace asked if he'd ever actually searched for any of his abandoned children, Frank mumbled something about hard times and moving forward. The man who'd called himself my father couldn't even pretend he'd ever wanted to be one. Closing arguments brought everything full circle. Thornton, clearly defeated but still trying, made one last appeal to family values and forgiveness. But Grace's closing was devastating. She stood before the jury, letting silence build before speaking. 27 years ago, Frank and Diane Morrison made a choice. Not the desperate choice of overwhelmed parents, but the calculated decision of criminals evading justice. They didn't just abandon Becky. They abandoned Marcus. They abandoned Trinity. They abandoned their children like evidence of crimes they were fleeing. Now, they want you to reward that abandonment with millions of dollars earned by the man who actually parented Becky, who loved her, who gave her the life they denied her. Don't let them profit from the pain they caused. Don't let them steal from the grave of the only real father Becky ever knew. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. Grace said it was one of the fastest verdicts she'd seen in a case this complex. We sat in a conference room waiting, Marcus and Trinity flanking me like the protective siblings they'd become. When the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict, my heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. We filed back into the courtroom, the Morrisons looking confident, probably planning how to spend money they'd never see. Diane had reapplied her makeup, ready for her victory moment. Frank straightened his tie. Ashley smiled at the cameras. Only Connor looked worried, perhaps the only one who'd paid attention to how badly their case had gone. The foreman stood, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who'd taken notes throughout the trial. In the matter of Morrison versus Henderson, we find in favor of the defendant, Rebecca Henderson, on all counts. The words hit me like a physical force, relief and vindication flooding through my system. But the jury wasn't done. We further find that the plaintiffs brought this suit in bad faith, with malicious intent, and for the sole purpose of financial gain. We recommend the court consider sanctions and criminal referral for attempted extortion. The courtroom erupted. Diane shrieked about injustice while Frank tried to calm her. Ashley burst into tears, whether genuine or performed, I couldn't tell. Connor just slouched lower in his seat, already plotting his next move, I was sure. Judge Williams restored order with sharp bangs of her gavel. She'd clearly been waiting for this moment. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, she began, her voice cold with controlled anger, this court has witnessed one of the most egregious cases of parental abandonment and attempted financial exploitation I've seen in 30 years on the bench. You abandoned not 1, not 2, but 3 innocent children while fleeing criminal investigations. You made no attempt to reunite with any of them until money became involved. You've shown no remorse, no accountability, only greed and entitlement. Her words fell like hammers, each one driving the Morrisons deeper into their seats. Even Thornton looked like he wanted to disappear. The judge continued, her focus shifting to the broader implications. This court orders that all legal fees be paid by the plaintiffs. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for consideration of criminal charges including extortion, harassment, and fraud. Mr. Connor Morrison, your breaking and entering charge will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. Mrs. Ashley Morrison, your social media harassment campaign may also face legal consequences. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. As for any future contact, I'm issuing permanent restraining orders. You are to have no contact with Rebecca Henderson, Marcus Bradley, or Trinity Chin. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. The Morrisons were arrested on the courthouse steps, Diane still screaming about injustice while being loaded into a police car. Frank looked defeated, finally understanding that their con had failed catastrophically. Ashley tried to run but was caught by security, her pearls scattering across the pavement like the fake tears she'd cried. Connor was already in custody, his existing charges now compounded by the judge's referral. The media, who'd been somewhat sympathetic to them, turned savage in their coverage. The story of serial child abandoners trying to steal millions made national headlines. Their faces became synonymous with parental failure and greed. The next months brought a strange kind of peace. Without the trial looming, I could properly grieve Richard and Martha, the parents who'd chosen me. Marcus, Trinity, and I met monthly, building the sibling relationship the Morrisons had denied us. We weren't trying to be a traditional family, we'd all learned that blood didn't make family. But we understood each other in ways others couldn't. We'd all been thrown away by the same people, had all built lives despite that abandonment. Marcus was dating a fellow officer who understood his trust issues. Trinity was working on a book about abandonment trauma. I threw myself into expanding my company, focusing on software that helped connect foster children with resources and support. Connor ended up serving 18 months for breaking and entering. His letters from prison started angry and entitled but gradually shifted to something resembling remorse. I never responded, but Trinity, ever the social worker, began corresponding with him. She believed people could change, even those raised by Frank and Diane. Ashley disappeared after the trial, her social media presence scrubbed, her dreams of easy money shattered. Someone said she'd moved to Florida, starting over where the Morrison name wasn't infamous. I hoped she'd learned something, but I doubted it. The apple rarely fell far from the tree, and she'd shown herself to be her parents' daughter in all the worst ways. Frank and Diane's fraud trial took place a year later. The DA had built an extensive case, not just about us but about their decades of scams and schemes. They were convicted on multiple counts, sentenced to 5 years each. The courtroom was packed with their victims, elderly people they'd scammed, landlords they'd cheated, employers they'd stolen from. When the verdict was read, there were actual cheers. The couple who'd spent their lives running from consequences finally faced them. I attended every day of that trial, not for revenge but for closure. Watching them in orange jumpsuits, no longer able to play victims, felt like the final chapter of a story that began in an airport 27 years ago. With the legal battles over, I could focus on what Richard would have wanted me to do with his legacy. I established the Henderson Foundation for Abandoned Children, with Marcus and Trinity as board members. We provided scholarships for foster children aging out of the system, funded programs that helped abandoned children find therapeutic resources, and supported research into attachment disorders and trauma recovery. The $5.5 million the Morrisons had tried to steal became seed money for helping children they'd thrown away. Richard would have loved the poetic justice of it. Martha would have been proud of the healing it represented. I also started speaking publicly about abandonment and its impact. The first speech terrified me, standing before a conference of social workers and foster care advocates. But as I told my story, I saw recognition in their eyes, understanding from those who worked with thrown-away children every day. The speeches led to a book, From Airport to Boardroom, a story of abandonment and redemption, with all proceeds going to the foundation. It became a bestseller, not because my story was unique but because it gave voice to thousands of children abandoned by parents who chose themselves over their kids. The book tour was exhausting but cathartic, meeting other abandoned children who'd built beautiful lives from broken beginnings. Finding love seemed impossible after everything. Trust didn't come easily when your first memory was being left behind. But James Chen, no relation to Trinity's adoptive family, was patient in ways that surprised me. He was a pediatrician who specialized in treating foster children, understanding trauma from a clinical perspective that complemented my lived experience. We met at a foundation fundraiser where he was presenting on the medical impacts of childhood abandonment. He asked me to coffee to discuss collaboration between his practice and our programs. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became a relationship built on mutual understanding and respect. He never pushed for more than I could give, understanding that some wounds healed slowly. 2 years after the trial, Marcus called with news that shouldn't have surprised me but did. Frank had died in prison, a heart attack at 58. Diane was released for the funeral but had nowhere to go after. Their house had been foreclosed, their remaining children wanted nothing to do with her. She ended up in a homeless shelter, finally experiencing the desperation she'd claimed drove her to abandon us. Trinity wanted to help her, the social worker unable to turn away from anyone in need. Marcus refused to care, pointing out she'd made her choices. I felt nothing, which surprised me. The woman who'd given birth to me, who'd walked away in an airport, who'd tried to steal my inheritance, she was a stranger whose death meant nothing because her life had meant nothing to me. Richard used to say that family was about choice, not chromosomes. He chose me that day in the foster home, chose to love a damaged 7-year-old with abandonment issues and night terrors. Martha chose to mother me through teenage angst and trauma responses. They chose me every day until their last breaths, and that choice made them my parents in ways Frank and Diane never were. The inheritance they left wasn't just money but the knowledge that I was worth choosing, worth loving, worth keeping. No lawsuit could take that away. No biological connection could replace it. Family isn't about blood or money, it's about who shows up when life gets hard. Richard and Martha Henderson were my real parents, and no court case could ever change that. The foundation grew beyond my wildest dreams. We opened residential facilities for aged-out foster youth, providing not just housing but life skills training and emotional support. We funded research that changed how abandonment trauma was treated. We successfully lobbied for legislation making child abandonment penalties more severe and support for abandoned children more comprehensive. Every success felt like a victory not just for me but for Marcus, Trinity, and the thousands of children whose stories would never make headlines. We turned our pain into purpose, our abandonment into advocacy. The money the Morrisons wanted so desperately became a force for helping the very children they'd proven themselves incapable of loving. James proposed on the 5th anniversary of the trial verdict, understanding the significance of that date. He did it at the Foundation's annual gala, in front of 500 supporters, saying he wanted everyone to witness him choosing me, publicly and permanently. The wedding was small, just our chosen family and closest friends. Marcus walked me down the aisle, Trinity stood as my maid of honor, and Grace officiated. Richard and Martha's photos sat in the front row where parents should be. I wore Martha's wedding dress, altered to fit but carrying her love. In my bouquet, I carried a photo of the scared 5-year-old at the airport, a reminder of how far I'd come. That little girl with her teddy bear and abandonment trauma had grown into a woman surrounded by chosen love. The epilogue of my story isn't really an ending but a beginning. At 35, I run a successful tech company and a foundation that's helped thousands of abandoned children. I'm married to a man who understands that some days I still need reassurance he won't leave. Marcus is now a detective specializing in crimes against children. Trinity runs a treatment center for attachment disorders. Connor, after his release, went through intensive therapy and now works with at-risk youth, trying to break the cycle his parents perpetuated. Ashley resurfaced last year, sending a letter of apology that seemed genuine. I didn't respond, but I don't wish her ill. Some bridges, once burned, don't need rebuilding. On quiet nights, I still think about that airport. I can smell the industrial cleaning products, hear the announcements echoing off hard walls, feel the plastic chair beneath my legs. But now, instead of wondering why they left, I'm grateful they did. If Frank and Diane had kept me, I'd have grown up in their chaos of crime and cons. I'd never have met Richard and Martha, never learned that parents could be steady and sure. I'd never have discovered my love for technology or built a company that employs hundreds. I'd never have met James or helped other abandoned children find hope. Their abandonment, meant to free them from responsibility, freed me to become someone they could never have imagined. That's the ultimate irony. In throwing me away, they gave me everything. What would you do if the parents who abandoned you suddenly wanted your inheritance? Have you ever had family members show their true colors when money was involved? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear that family isn't always about blood. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more true stories about overcoming life's greatest challenges. Remember, sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things that could ever happen for us. Until next time, choose your family wisely and never forget that you are worthy of being chosen. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always find the strength to turn your pain into purpose.